Hi and welcome to Writing with Steve with me, Steve Evans. This is the second video in two videos which looks at proofreading your work. Today we're looking at using active sentences and how by using active sentences you can greatly energize and improve your work. Active sentences make your writing more interesting, and they work on the simple basis of the three key elements of a sentence, which are subject, verb and object. For example, in this simple sentence, Amina drove the car. Amina is the subject, drove is the verb, and car is the object of the sentence. The subject is the thing or the person that is doing the action. The verb contains the action. In this case, it was to drive. The object is the thing or the person that the action is being done to. In this case, the car. So those three simple elements of subject, verb and object are your foundation for writing an active sentence. By contrast, a sentence written in the passive voice, also known as a passive sentence, would be the car was driven by Amina. In this case, you've placed the reader's focus on the car and not Amina. Amina becomes secondary to the sentence. It's even possible to remove Amina completely from that sentence. The car was driven. So hopefully that example shows you that the active form of that sentence is far more energized and interesting. Also, it reduces the number of words you need to write, which is really important if you're working to a particular word count. So for example, the rope was thrown by Sue to Jim. We can reduce to Sue threw Jim the rope. However, you may sometimes want to write using the passive voice. So for example, in our last video where we were examining a draft paragraph I'd written, I wrote that the protagonist trailed in the shadow of the man. This made her a passive object. The focus was not on her. And that was done deliberately because I wanted to create the impression that she was acting beyond her own powers and had no choice. It was as if she was being led by the man under his spell, which was to meet or to explore the themes of love when sometimes we feel quite powerless in the presence of somebody we feel attracted to. So in my case, writing in a passive voice and using a passive sentence met the context and the theme of the story. So there's no hard or fast rule. Ask yourself, do you wish to write for a particular theme and context, and then shape the sentence to meet the theme and the context of your story. And again, look for strong verbs in your writing. So in the example, Sue threw Jim the rope, threw might be a particular verb to use and perfectly adequate. So for example, if Jim is stuck in sinking sand and he's quickly sinking and time is running out, is threw the best verb? What about hurl? Sue hurled the rope to Jim. Sue hurled the rope towards Jim. So again, we can look for stronger verbs as we're proofreading and see whether the original verb we were using is perfectly adequate to the context of the story and the situation. A common verb that often invites consideration of whether it's adequate or not is look or looked. For example, Amina looked at the man. However, depending on the context, looked might not be the best choice of verb. Consider alternatives, and with each alternative comes a different nuance to the character and to the situation. So for example, instead of saying Amina looked at the man, what would be suggested if we said Amina stared at the man, gazed at the man, peeked at the man, or even gawked at the man? So as you proofread, always be looking for the strongest verb you can use. This includes the active verb. So an active verb, as the name suggests, introduces more energy and more description into the situation. For example, instead of writing the tenement block was in front of her, I might write the tenement block towered above her. So as I'm proofreading, I always look for is, was, or will be in my sentences, and I consider whether these can be replaced by an active verb. For example, instead of writing as she got on the tram, the conductor was in the aisle checking tickets, I changed this to as she boarded the tram, the conductor blocked the aisle checking tickets. So when considering alternative words and particularly strong verbs and active verbs, a thesaurus is really useful. It's invaluable. I use it all the time. Of course, you can pick up a thesaurus at lots of charity shops pretty cheaply. This one cost me £1.99, which is excellent value. And of course, there are online versions of a thesaurus you could use too. Okay, so in the last video, I was sharing a draft paragraph I'd written, and I was modelling my proofreading process, the way I approach the proofreading. And since the last video, I've been working on it, honing it a little bit more, and I just wanted to share some more of those proofreading tips with you, and hopefully you'll find these useful. So after this video, it would be really useful for you to check out our first video on proofreading. So originally the first two sentences repeated the phrase she found herself, because initially I wanted to make it sound she was in a routine she could not escape from, and she found herself makes it seem she can't offer an explanation, like you find yourself somewhere and you don't know how you got there. So I thought it was a nice phrase to use, and I used a repetition technique, so I just repeated it in order to say she was in this routine of following the man, and she couldn't really explain why she was following the man. But I thought using it once already conveyed that predicament, and I also wanted to reduce the word count. So I've changed it now, and it reads, then, like clockwork, she trailed in the wake of his great shadow along the sidewalk to the tenements on 8th Street. Also, by using a passive sentence, I hope to convey her sense of powerlessness. Also, in the draft sentence, I hadn't given her a name, and I thought it is a courtesy to the reader to provide that important piece of information as early on as possible. Of course, if I wanted to ratchet up, build up the suspense, a sense of mystery, I may want to withhold that. So I've just taken a decision to disclose her name, and I'm not disclosing yet the man's name. So I'm going to retain some mystery, I'm going to keep my readers curious, but I think because she is the protagonist, she's central to this story, I think it's really important to share her name now. Names convey so much information about a person, and the choice of your characters can add depth and texture to your story. So think, for example, some of the great names from literature. Ebenezer Scrooge, Holly Golightly, Willy Wonka, John Coffin, Hermione Granger, and Munro Starr. Oh, Munro Starr, what a name. Could you think of a better name to be associated with the film industry than Munro Starr? So my choice, I thought of how I could provide additional texture to my character, and I chose a simple name, but one I hope which suggests romance and the theme of love. So I've named her Rose. So I've changed the sentence now to every weekday at 5:15 p.m. Rose found herself on some errand that took her by the bus stop where he got off after his 12-hour shift at the slaughterhouse. And since the last video, I've also tightened a couple of sentences up. So for example, I had originally written, that night she could not fall to sleep, and I've replaced it with, that night she could not sleep. And as you can see, it's just a gradual process of going through the sentences at a word level, step by step, and just taking a systematic approach. Maybe go through first looking at verbs, then going through again thinking of excessive word counts that you may want to replace. You may then want to be looking at active or passive sentences. Also pronoun use, are you using she or her a lot? If the reader already knows the name of your character, you may want to repeat that name sometimes and then use she and her and pepper it around and mix it up just to add to variety and to keep your readers interested. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please leave a comment, hit the bell, and subscribe. This video is one of a series of videos all geared towards you planning, structuring, writing and proofreading all the way up to publishing your story. So if you haven't followed those earlier videos, don't forget to check them out. We've created a playlist to make that easier for you. Don't forget, this is part 2 of a series of 2 videos on proofreading. So if you haven't done so already, please check out our first video on proofreading, which contains some fantastic tips on how to improve your first draft. Until next time, write well.